humans, my name is Dale Kingsmill. This is a fairy tale. Specifically, we're doing Snow White today, Snow White and the Seven Dwarves, because I saw an ugly mirror in a rich person's house on the internet, and it's all I can think about. So, where do we begin? Once upon a time, there was a woman, a queen even, who she was doing one of them embroidery hoops. She was embroidering at the window, and it was the dead of winter, and she'd been reading clearly a lot of poems by the Romantics, and she was looking out, and she wasn't paying much attention as she gazed into the snow and thought about how beautiful it was and how cold and pure, and she stabbed herself with her embroidery needle, and blood dripped down onto the snow outside her window, and she was so taken by it. She was like, oh, gorgeous, the blood red and the snow white and even the black, the ebony black of my embroidery hoop. If only, she thought, I had a daughter who had skin as white as snow and lips as red as blood and hair as black as my ebony embroidery hoop. And in classic fairy tale fashion, she got her wish, but she died in childbirth. So she's dead. Forget about her, she's dead. But now the king was left with a daughter, and they called her Snow White, which was short for Snow White, Blood Red, Ebony Black. And she was a beautiful baby, she truly was. Unfortunately, again in true fairy tale fashion, the king got remarried, and the new queen, the step queen, she was a gorgeous woman herself, but that was all she had. And she desperately, desperately needed to be the most pretty person in any room. Without that, her identity was gone. And she was the most beautiful person in any room, at least for a while, so things were fine for a while. Unfortunately, as Snow White aged, she got more and more beautiful. You may, at this point, like I did, think, I see where this is going. Once she becomes a woman, she will surpass the beauty of the queen, and that's when all the trouble will begin. You're almost right. It only takes her till she's 7 years old. I do wish that we weren't told that. Really makes the rest of the story very troubling, but there we go. Once she turned 7, Snow White was more beautiful than her stepmother, the evil queen. Now, the step queen had this mirror, a magical looking glass, which I'm sure you know she used to stand in front of, and she would say to it, "Looking glass upon the wall, who is fairest of us all?" Because she knew that the mirror could only tell the truth, and she liked hearing it. She liked being reminded that she was the most beautiful person. And the mirror would say, "You are the fairest of all." But now, one day, after Snow White had turned 7, the queen went to her magical mirror and she said, "Looking glass upon the wall, who's the fairest of us all?" And the looking glass said, "Queen, you are full fair, 'tis true, but Snow White is better looking than you." I can't remember the exact wording. And the queen's brain exploded. She did not cope with the news that this child was going to be more beautiful than she was, so she reacted the way that any evil stepmother from a fairy tale would. She brought in a huntsman and said, "You, guy, I need you to take this 7-year-old out into the woods, and I need you to kill her and bring me back her heart as proof." And the huntsman was like, "Yeah, that's fine, I'm fine with that job." So he took little child Snow White out into the middle of the woods, and he drew his cutlass, and he was just about to pierce her heart with it. Now that he has his sword out, Snow White understands what's happening. "I'll cut her some slack, she's only 7. And she's like, "Please don't kill me, I'll just run off into the woods, you'll never hear from me again, just let me live." The huntsman goes, "Yeah, sure, actually that sounds fine, I'll still get paid, I'll go." He kills a pig. He gets the heart out of the pig, the wild boar, and he's like, "I'll just take this back, it's be fine." He takes the boar's heart back to the queen. He's like, "Hey, here's the heart of the child, Snow White." And the queen's like, "Great." And she seasons it with salt, and she cooks it up, and she eats it down. Not for any, magic spell or anything, she just does it. Meanwhile, Snow White runs off into the woods, runs as far as she can, as long as she can. Finally, when the sun began to set, she came across this little house. And the whole story turns into Goldilocks and the Three Bears for a little while. Basically, she goes inside, and everything is sort of sized for a child, and there's 7 of everything. There's 7 dinner plates, and 7 chairs, and there's 7 cups, and 7 spoons, and 7 beds, all those things. There's 7 of everything. And Snow White is so hungry, and she's so tired, so she does the Goldilocks thing. She decides to sample all the stuff on her. I will give her this. She definitely approaches it in a cleverer way than Goldilocks did. She makes sure not to, like, finish any one thing. So she uses this dwarf's plate, eats a little bit of this dwarf's porridge, uses this dwarf's salt, eats with this dwarf's spoon. Just like one of everyone's thing, so that hopefully when she puts them all back in their place, and she just eats a little bit of everyone's porridge, right? Thinking that maybe they won't notice. It's pretty good thinking, really. She does try out every single bed. And, you know, this one's too short, this one's too lumpy, etc. until she finds the bed that is the perfect, comfortable bed for her, and she falls asleep. Now, middle of that night, all the dwarves come home. They've been mining gold all day in the 7 mountains. Do they get 1 mountain each? Whistle while you work. I can't whistle. That song makes me sad. And unfortunately for Snow White, the dwarves are on it. They nail their perception check, and they're like, someone's been nibbling my bread, someone's been sitting in my chair, and they all notice, slowly over time, wait, each of our beds has been messed up. And then finally they come to the last bed, and they find a legit child, a strange human child, sleeping in the bed. They're all like, well, damn, there's a story behind this. So they let her sleep, and they just hang around waiting for her to wake up. And when she does, she panics. She enters panic mode, which, good survival instinct, Snow. My favorite thing is that the 7th dwarf, the one whose bed she was sleeping in, he just shares with each of the other dwarves. Like 1 hour with Doc, 1 hour with Dopey, 1 hour with Grumpy, until eventually it's morning time. Which I guess means they only sleep for 6 hours. They did get home late. So Snow explains the story of how she got here, and the evil queen and the huntsman who let her go and all that, and the dwarves are like, well damn, that's very dramatic. You can live with us if you want. And a deal is struck up in which Snow White will clean the house for them and get their dinner ready for them when they come home, and in exchange she can live in the house and be safe. So from then on, every morning the dwarves would go out to mine gold and diamonds and whatever all day, leave Snow in the house, and they would say, look, there's an evil queen who's out to kill you, she really wants you dead, it will not take her long to figure out that you're not dead, and she'll probably be able to work out where you are, so just stay inside, don't talk to anyone while we're not here, stay safe, stranger danger, alright? Snow White says, yep, alright. So the dwarves go off to work. Now the queen the last few days had been fairly comfortable. Snow White was dead, she'd eaten her heart, things were looking up. Until she went to do her mirror thing, her general mirror routine, and the queen went to the looking glass and she said, looking glass upon the wall, who's the fairest of us all? That mirror is a little snitch, 'cause it says, Queen, thou art a beauty rare, but Snow White, living in the glen with the 7 little men, is 1,000 times more fair. Not only giving up that Snow White is alive, but also telling the queen where she is. What the hell, mirror? Come on, be cool. And the queen chucked a wobbly, I am telling you. She freaked out because she's like, what the hell am I meant to do if Snow White's not dead? If Snow White's not dead, I am not the prettiest. So what the queen does, she dresses up like an old peddler woman, and she travels across the 7 mountains until she comes to the home of Snow White and the 7 dwarves. The 7 dwarves are out working, Snow White is home alone, and the queen, she knocks on the door in her elderly woman guise and says, oh, I'm here selling lace and twine and thread, other textile goods. Yes. And Snow White was like, I don't gotta be afraid of this woman. She's just an old woman selling lace and thread and twine and other textile goods. And so Snow White let her in and bought a bunch of lace. And the woman said, oh yes, come here, child. You are a beauty. Let me lace you up properly for once. And she did. She laced up Snow White good and tight. Too tight, some might say, because Snow White couldn't breathe. She did begin to suffocate. She fell down as if dead, turning blue and all. And the queen said, ha ha, suck it. Try being the fairest now. 7-year-old girl. Try being the fairest while you're dead, sucker! And the queen, in her elderly woman disguise, chomped back over the 7 mountains. Now, luckily, this had happened pretty close to evening, and so the dwarves came home, and they found Snow White lying on the ground, turning blue, looking like death. They quickly pulled her up, and they snipped the lace, and Snow White began breathing again. And she explained what happened, and the dwarves said, "Snow, please, remember the evil queen conversation that we had? Don't let anyone in when we're not here." Now, when the queen arrived home, she went to her mirror and she said, "Looking glass upon the wall, who's the fairest of us all?" And the looking glass said, once again, "Queen, thou art a beauty fair, but Snow White's living in the glen, she's got 7 dwarves hanging out, and she's still prettier than you are." "Seriously?" says the queen. "Alright, fine. No more Mr. Nice Guy. I'm dipping into potion making, and I'm gonna make one heck of a poison comb." So she goes, she cooks up a poison comb, she dresses up as another different old lady, and she heads off across the 7 mountains once again. What does the king think she's doing during all of this? Does he know his daughter is supposedly dead? So anyway, alright, the queen shows up at the home of the 7 dwarves again, and once again the dwarves are out at work, and she knocks on the door, and she says, "Oh, I've got good wares to sell, fine wares. Yes, come look at my wares." And Snow White sticks her head out the window and she says, "Go away, I'm not allowed to talk to strangers." Good, she's learning. And the queen in disguise says, "Aha, you may not talk to strangers, but you are allowed to look at my good and fine wares, are you not?" She pulls out the golden comb and says, "Ooh, isn't this lovely? Wouldn't you like this pretty comb?" And Snow White would like that pretty comb. She lets the queen in to buy the pretty comb. I swear, it's like Samson and Delilah all over again. She is 7. I keep forgetting. She's a literal child, so you know. "Now for once, child," says the queen, "your hair shall be properly combed." And as soon as the poison comb touches Snow White's scalp, she drops to the ground as if dead. "Paragon of beauty," says the queen, more like paragon of being dead. Yeah. And the queen heads back over the 7 mountains, home again, jiggity jug. Once again, this happened near evening time, and the dwarves came home, and they found Snow White on the ground. They couldn't see what had killed her, but after examining, they found the comb in her hair, and they pulled it out. And I don't know what kind of poison this is, but as soon as they pulled the comb out of her hair, Snow White was no longer poisoned, and she got up and she was fine. And she said, "This old woman sold me a comb, and I died again." And the dwarves said, "Please stop this." "Alright, you mirror. Who's the friggin' fairest? Who's the fairest, alright?" "Yeah, you're pretty. You're like an 8.2 out of 10, but you know who's prettier than you, though, is Snow White. She's prettier than you are." Ah! The queen is done with this. She's resorting to the dark magical arts this time. She heads off to her secret witch laboratory. I don't know. She goes to a secret room she has, and she devises something truly malicious. The queen cooked up a poisonous apple. Gorgeous and ruby red, the perfect apple, the most enticing of fruits. So poisonous that even the tiniest taste of it could kill. And so the queen dressed up as another separate old woman, and she went to go and talk to Snow White once again. She knocked on the door of the dwarves' hut and she said, "I have beautiful fruits to sell, the best fruit you've ever had. Please, please buy my fruit." And Snow White stuck her head out the window and she said, "No, I'm not allowed to talk to strangers. You're not coming in. I don't trust you. You're the evil queen. You gotta poison me to death." And the queen said, "Fine, whatever, I don't care. I can sell my apples elsewhere. You sure you don't want this, though? It's pretty good looking." Snow White was like, "No, it is poison. It is a poison apple, and you're gonna poison me." And the queen was like, "You know what? I'll prove to you that this apple isn't poison. I'll even have a bit of it myself." And so she cut out a little piece, and she ate it for herself. See? It's perfectly fine. It's tasty. Delicious, delicious apple. Damn, this is a good apple. But now, the queen was very clever. She wasn't taking any risks this time. See, the queen had devised the apple such that all the poison was in the red part of the apple, and this one white patch was safe for her to eat. So when Snow White saw the queen eat part of this apple, she thought, it isn't poison at all. And she bought the rest of it and she greedily bit into it. Oh, I'm gonna get lipstick all over my face. Give me a second. You know what? We all live with our choices. So Snow White took a bite, And as soon as it touched her tongue, as soon as she swallowed, she dropped down as if dead. And the queen said, "White as snow, red as blood, black as ebony, alive as a dead guy. Ha! Winner, me!" And she headed back over the 7 mountains to go home and talk to her mirror, where she said, "Looking glass upon the wall, who is fairest of us all?" And finally, the mirror said, "You are the fairest of us all." The dwarves came home that night and they found Snow White on the dead. Snow White was on the floor. She looked like she was dead. They couldn't find anything. There were no combs. There was no lacing issue. This time, far as they could see, she was just dead. Nothing they could do could bring her back. So the dwarves surrounded Snow White and they wept for 3 whole days before they could even begin to discuss what they should do with her body. And decided, rather creepily, that she was too beautiful and it would be too much of a shame to bury her underground or hide her away in a mausoleum. So what they did was they built a coffin of glass that they put Snow White's body in, and they inlaid it with all this gold and beautiful jewels and a little plaque that said this was the daughter of a king, and they left it on top of one of their 7 mountains. And they always had one dwarf guarding it so that she would never be left alone, because they had learnt the hard way that leaving Snow White alone leads to her dying by poison. For a long time, Snow White stayed dead in her glass coffin, until one day a young prince was traveling through the region across those 7 mountains. And he looked at this beautiful child in a gold coffin and he thought, "I cannot live without Snow White." And he begged the dwarfs. He said, "Sell me the coffin. I will give you all the gold in the world." And the dwarfs said, "That's a terrible offer. We own all the gold in the world. We've been mining it for ages from all these mountains. We have that. We've got all the gold. Also, it's the body of a child. This really shouldn't be a thing for sale." But the prince won't take no for an answer and he begs. He's like, "I cannot live without Snow White." Very weird. But eventually the dwarfs take pity on him and they let the prince carry her away, his servants carry her away. The servants aren't great at it. They trip on a bundle of sticks and into a bush, and they jostle the coffin around as they're traveling back to the prince's kingdom, and the little piece of apple that was still in Snow White's throat was dislodged. It came loose. She coughed it up, and then she sits up and just starts screaming. "Ah! Ah!" And the prince explains. He's like, no, it's fine. I swear, it's fine. But you should come with me and marry me." That's not fine, but she does agree. Let's remember in these times that children cannot consent. So now, very fancy times, Snow White the princess and whoever this prince is are getting married. Ooh la la, everyone who's anyone is gonna be there. Including the Step Queen. Oh yes, and you know what she's doing? She's desperate to be the most beautiful one at the wedding, because that's who she is. So she's like wearing her own white gown. She's prepping to outdo the bride in every area, and she sits down in front of her mirror before heading out and she says, "All right, looking glass upon the wall, who's the sexiest of all?" And the mirror, who's learnt a little subtlety and foreshadowing by now, says, "Oh, queen, you are beauty rare, but the young bride is 1,000 times more fair." And the queen was like, "I don't want to go to the wedding. I don't want to go to the wedding where this girl's more pretty than me, but I have to go to the wedding. I have to know how much prettier she is than me." So she shows up, and lo and behold, there's Snow White. She's still alive, unstoppable. All the dwarves are hanging out. Then there's like a 1-sentence end note that says that she was put in red-hot iron shoes and forced to dance until she died. That's how the queen dies. That's how the story ends. No explanation as to where they got the red-hot iron shoes that made her dance, or how they got them on her feet, but the queen dies. That's the end of the story! I hope you enjoyed it. Faerie Daels are good. Haven't done one in a little while. I actually kind of enjoyed this story. I didn't think I would, but I really did. I can't think of anything else I need to say. So apart from that, I think we're done. Email this to your grandma. Have a good one. Whistle water.